I'm here today with Dr. Gerald Grubbs from Sarasota, Florida, and he just came out of surgery, and we'll ask him about that. But I think what Dr. Grubbs is going to talk about today is something that everybody wants to know about once they start declining in hormones. But most women I know are too embarrassed to ask about it, and men are too embarrassed to ask about it. And I think you're going to be amazed at what you're going to learn today, because he has some major new breakthrough answers, things that didn't exist before. And for women who are experiencing any kind of sexual dysfunction, he has some amazing new information for you, because as you know, we women have been left out of this loop. Welcome, Dr. Grubbs. So nice to meet you.
Thank you so much.
I'm so glad you're here. One of the reasons that I do these interviews is to explain to people that when I first started writing books about doctors who understood hormones, natural hormone replacement, I guess in the 80s, there were only 30 doctors I could find all across the country. When it got to 250,000 over the years, I realized that we had to come up with something else, and that's what foreverhealth.com is, to bring you the kind of doctor that you're looking for, because with all due respect, if you go to a regular doctor for hormone issues who hasn't chosen to specialize in bioidentical hormones, it is actually like going to a plumber for a heart bypass. It's that out of their scope. So with that introduction, I want you to meet Dr. Grubbs. So tell me, as I look at all your information, it's been quite a journey, and you have quite an impressive educational background. But you're really focusing in on sexual issues in your hormone. I know you do all the other hormones, we'll talk about it, but sexual issues. How did that happen?
Well, one of the most rewarding things when you start doing bioidentical hormone replacement is just, how much better people feel 30, 60, 90 days after the process. So you wake up things that have been somewhat neglected, forgotten about, or disinterested in. So the fact that you get people interested again is great. And then you start talking to your patients, saying, well, it really wasn't as great as what I remembered it being, or, I'm having some problems, and, is it me? Is it him? So we started working on and developing procedures that, since you had a rejuvenated sexual drive, to make sure that you were at your peak sexual performance and were getting everything that you wanted out of it. So that's how all these procedures were sort of created.
Well, up till now, we've known about erectile dysfunction, but men had an answer. In fact, I remember Hugh Hefner saying the greatest discovery of the last millennium has been Viagra. But I always thought Viagra is more of a Band-Aid, and what are the long-term effects of putting a foreign molecule in your body that regularly? Tell me about the Erectus shot that you are working with.
Okay, the first thing that we do, in my background as a cardiovascular interventional radiologist, is to make certain that there's not an organic problem, because if you've got blockages in your arteries and your pelvis that go to those structures, that all the Viagra, Cialis, and everything else in the world is never going to work. So we're able to non-invasively do CTAs of the pelvis, and if we see those blockages, then we can do balloon angioplasty, stent placement, even drug-eluting stents to enhance the blood flow down there. That's a better way of solving the problem. But if we can't do that, then we developed procedures, the P shot and the Erectus shot, and the Erectus shot is definitely the best of the procedures, to sort of stimulate what we call a neurovascular regeneration of those small little blood vessels and the small little nerves that are down there. Just like in diabetics that get peripheral neuropathy, this is sort of the same equivalent. So what we're able to do is use platelet-rich plasma. So we take blood from you, spin it down in special centrifuges, and get pure platelet-rich plasma in a double spin. And with the Erectus shot, we then mix that with your own stem cells and do an injection in 4 different locations in your corpus cavernosum, and then one other area on the dorsal part of a men's penis to enhance their sexual feeling. But it wakes up those neurovascular bundles that have been dormant for years. It's a much, much more direct effect. It usually lasts a minimum of a year, sometimes as long as 2 years. But people realize the benefits from it literally within days and even weeks. They can tell the difference, and you do get a small incremental increase in your girth, which is more important to most women than the other alternative, but it just works tremendously well. So we do it just with PRP. That's the P shot. Everybody's got a different sort of budget or price point, if you will, but the best performance comes with the PRP combined with the stem cells.
So the PRP is the platelet-rich plasma, and then you take the stem cells. Where do you get the stem cells from, banked or from their own fat?
Usually we do a little mini liposuction. We do have 2 new alternatives that are very new to the market. One is amnion-derived stem cells, and even one step better than that is cord-derived stem cells. And you've just got to imagine these are 9-month-old progenitor stem cells, the strongest, most potent, most viable stem cells that exist. We all make stem cells throughout our whole life, but as we get older, just like all the other parts of us, that process sort of slows down. Manufacturing and production isn't what it was in our 20s. We can give you some things to sort of help stimulate some more natural stem cell production. But again, we give the patient, whatever option they want. If they want a little mini liposuction, which a lot of people do, and we do some enhancement procedures, that you can imagine for men and for women that, sometimes they do want to do that. So we can get it from their own stem cells, or if they want to do the amnion, or even better now, what we really started using mostly are the cord blood cells.
Now, when you say cord blood cells, so this is from another human being, right? Like from a newborn?
But this is privileged tissue. So where this comes from, this is sort of the barrier that sort of separates mother from baby, so neither one of them attacks one another. So what they're able to do is, in women that have been fully vetted, most of these are sponsored by the Catholic Church, so they've been fully screened and have no disease processes, are having an elective C-section. The cord and the placenta are harvested immediately at delivery, and this is all done in the operating room. So they isolate and they concentrate the stem cells from the cord blood, and then it's immediately frozen in a very controlled environment. And what we now know is a lot of people are just thawing those out to room temperatures, rubbing them in their hands or things like that. But we've developed a device that gradually thaws that tissue out so that none of the stem cells die. So we use that for the amnion and for the cord blood products.
That's very interesting. I know a little bit about stem cells, but I always thought you can't reject yourself, but you couldn't use somebody else's. So I didn't realize that you could use from the cord blood. Now, what about, and this is a little off point, but what about, I was reading a report by the Environmental Working Group that said they did a study across the economic spectrum, the poorest to the richest, of testing the cord blood of newborns for toxins. And they tested them for 287 different toxins and found that in every single case, all of them tested positive for a minimum of 180 different toxins. Does that play any part? Is that anything that is checked for, or does that play any part in using cord blood stem cells?
And see, that's the 2 companies that are FDA approved to do this. That part is completely removed. They are now able to isolate and concentrate. And so what we get in a vial is either 10 million or 30 million stem cells, and that's all that's in there. There's nothing else in there. There's a few little growth factors and some things like that, but everything else has been completely removed.
Well, that's incredible. Just not to talk about myself, but I thought it was rather historic. I was the first one to legally regrow my cancer breast using my own stem cells, but they took it from my own fat from my stomach. Boo-hoo. Now, I don't have a penis, but I can only imagine, being married to my husband so long, the idea of any kind of injection into the penis actually almost hurts me. Does it hurt, or are you under anesthetic?
We typically give everyone the option to have conscious sedation in my office. We have board certified anesthesiologists that do all of our procedures. Had a couple guys that, are a lot tougher than me, but most everyone given the option of a quick trip to La La Land, because the procedure only takes about 5 or 10 minutes. Most people opt for the quick trip to La La Land. We have some other things that we can give them in lieu of that, but most people are pretty smart when it comes to that decision.
Yeah, well, if all men are like my husband, I think that he would la his way through that. That's really incredible. And I'm from a thinking of, I'm not anti-pharmaceutical, but whenever I can treat any condition or problem using nature's tools, natural remedies, I always go there first because we're so inundated with chemicals and environmental assault anyway. So this is a real breakthrough. Let's now talk about women, because I would say most of the women I know my age are not interested in sex anymore. And I always say to them, you just have forgotten how great it is. But I know that they are completely hormonally imbalanced. So before we talk about bioidentical hormones and replacing them, what is the equivalent to the PRP or the P shot for women?
Well, women get one step further than what men get. They get a combination of procedures that work tremendously well. So we do a lot of Thermiva. We typically do the Thermiva procedure 3 times. So that's vaginal rejuvenation, because the RFA technology, radiofrequency ablation, it sort of stimulates the crypts inside of the vagina. A lot of times when we do bioidentical hormones, a lot of times the dryness and the atrophy get better, but underperformance, sometimes still not, where most women want to be. So by using the radiofrequency ablation, what it does is it warms those tissues up. It stimulates the crypts, which are what create the moisture. It also, again, causes neurovascular regeneration. So you get some tightening of the collagen and the elastin. So it tightens the vaginal vault. It actually shrinks the external tissues. And what we also learned, that if we use that over the clitoris and the clitoral hood, then that neurovascular stimulation really gave them, tremendous results from that. So typically what we do is we package these all together, and we'll do 3 different Thermiva procedures spaced out by about 30 days. And then at the very end of that, we do 1 of 2 different things. Again, it depends on what your budget, what your price point is. Are we going to use PRP alone? Or are we going to use PRP with the stem cells, which is definitely the best way to go. We call the PRP with the stem cells, that's called the V shot. So what we do is we do a few little injections in the clitoral hood and then into the clitoris itself. But then we also inject it into the superior vault of the vaginal wall. So just like the Thermiva is sort of helping with stress incontinence by tightening those external sphincter muscles right there, that's what adding that injection does for women as well. And it also is an injection into the mythical G-spot, but the women all have, tremendous results from that. Now, if they can only afford the PRP injection, we call that the O shot, the orgasm shot. We do everything the same way. It's just without the addition of the stem cells.
Now, does this hurt?
Women are a lot tougher than men. And I can tell you, over 75% choose not to have conscious sedation. We have this thing called, it's nitrous oxide mixed with oxygen. It's called Pronox. So at the very, very low dose where we mix it up, it's not like the laughing gas where you get like that, but it's an analgesic. So it comes out sort of in a water vapor sort of form. So they'll take a few puffs off of the Pronox, and, we can sort of tell when they get this silly little grin on their face that now's the split second that we have to do anything that might hurt. And they remember it, but they say, I just didn't really care. I could tell that it did sting like a bee, just like what you told me it was going to, but I didn't care. So you sort of disassociate from what is going on. But, women are tougher than men. More of them stay away, but there are some that say, I don't want to feel anything. And again, it's a 5 to 10 minute trip to La La Land. And, having the board certified anesthesiologist here to do it just, makes it that much safer and easier.
Do you do all of this in your office in Sarasota?
Do it all in our outpatient office, yes.
You have your own operating room and staff that you work with all the time?
Yes, we have about 4 operating rooms in the center. So this place is busy all the time.
Isn't that great? That's very appealing, because we hear so many terrible stories about the infections and the staff and things that are happening in hospitals. So I think any physician who has his own operating room is very appealing to the patient. Now, how great that women can go back to having orgasms and enjoying sex and looking forward to it, especially as you reach an age where you're declining in hormones, but at the same time, your kids are out of the house. You've already, you've got the career you and your husband get yourself back together again, or whoever your partner is. And then it's so frustrating for so many women because they've got the time, they just don't have the inclination. So what you're doing, I think, is a great service, because out of all you don't get letters anymore. When I first started writing books, you got letters, but now I get emails and Facebook and everything, and it comes up over and over and over again because it is anonymous. But now some women just want quality of life back first before we think about orgasms, before we think about the sexual life of the patient. Do you treat men and women, I presume, because you're doing this you just told me you did. How do you get started with the average female patient, and what is the first complaint most often that you hear?
Well, usually it's in the perimenopausal period when they start having the hot flashes or the hot flushes, and start putting on a little bit of weight. So we'll do their baseline, hormone, very comprehensive panel, and that's how we get started. And like we do with everybody, once they come through the door, we try to tell them is, please bring your significant other, because once we start doing this, and once we get you interested in all these things again, it's either going to be the pool boy starts looking better or the cocktail waitress starts looking better. So we strongly encourage that couples come in and do this together. And when they do, we give them a bundle package deal, just because, I'm trying to, make everybody happy.
Well, it's life-changing. It really, bringing back quality of life has to be so satisfying as a doctor, is it?
It is. I mean, in my insurance part of my medical practice, it's very, very rewarding what I do. I love what I do. I can't ever imagine stopping, which drives my wife crazy. But, this part of my practice that I've now been doing for a little over 3 years, I mean, believe me, you get more hugs from that practice for men and women than you do, from the other side. And I take care of cancer patients and patients with terrible vascular disease, and, and that's all very rewarding too. But, when you turn back the hands on the clock and you make somebody feel 10, 20, 30, 40 years younger than what they have felt, and all their miserable little aches and pains, go away. I mean, it's so rewarding, and it's so much fun to do. Interesting
what you just said. You love what you do. And I forget whose quote it is. If you love what you do, you never work a day in your life.
That's true. Well, there's some days, like the case that I got stuck in right before we had this interview. That wasn't a very fun hour, but everything turned out well. So it was just an aggravation. But you're right. I mean, I love coming to work every day because I do so many different things. I never know what I'm going to do, and the anesthesiologists are scratching their heads saying, "What?" It's always something new for me. I mean, we're in a very innovative part of medicine, and now adding all of this onto it as well. They're just shaking their heads every day. So, but it's a lot of fun.
Well, just with what you've already discussed, normally I do an interview with a doctor such as yourself to bring in patients from your area. But what you're talking about is so cutting edge and so new in its protocol. I would imagine people watching this would fly in from all over the country, maybe the world. The world has gotten small with social media. Thyroid.
Sarasota is a beautiful place to visit. So
yes, it is. It is. I love it there. The thyroid is a hormone that perplexes so many, and what I hear from, I mean, I'm not a doctor, but when I look at someone, I know what the signs are, especially on the face. I can tell by the way people are acting and their hot and cold issues, etc. And I always say, maybe you should ask your doctor about your thyroid. Oh, my thyroid's fine. But what I find is most doctors are still only testing for T4. What do you test for with the thyroid?
Well, the only one that really matters, when we do a baseline screen, we're testing pretty much everything, but it's the free T3. That's the only number that really matters. The TSH, the T4, T3, free T4. The only one that really matters is your free T3, and that you have to optimize. The only patients that we occasionally see that are somewhat reluctant to address their thyroid, or they ask, well, can I just take a natural supplement first before you start? replacing that hormone. It's kind of funny. They don't feel bad about optimizing their estrogen and their progesterone and even their DHEA and, even their testosterone, men and women. But it's almost like they look at it as a sign of failure if their thyroid isn't, working properly. And I tell them it's actually the first endocrine organ to fail. That's really how I got into this area of medicine. I mean, for years and years, I grew up in Tennessee and had Raynaud's. And so I thought the reason why my hands and feet were so cold all the time was because I had Raynaud's. Then I actually heard a lecture, read a book that made me read another book, and that was the first endocrine organ I started looking at, and went to somebody that did this and got my free T3 optimized up to around 4.5, and lo and behold, what I thought was Raynaud's was not Raynaud's. It was clinical hypothyroidism, and I barely, if ever, have any symptoms from that since. So that's the one and only target, that we have, is to get your free T3 somewhere around the 4 to 4.5 range.
Now, at what point does an out-of-whack thyroid go into Hashimoto's?
Well, we're at baseline, and then at least once a year we're checking for those antibodies. But normally what we prescribe is bioidentical compounded thyroid. Sometimes we'll use nature thyroid. We've really kind of gotten away from Armor since Big Pharma company bought them and their supplier and everything else. So usually not an option or a problem if you have Hashimoto's. But if you do, we also have a protocol where we do very low dose naltrexone that shuts down all that inflammation. And literally some people, if they're on the fence and we see that they have Hashimoto's, we'll start with that, because you can flip their free T3 up literally within a week sometimes, and 2 to 3 weeks would be a long time, to see that free T3 flip once you get the antibodies out of there.
And that's what I mean when I say when you need pharmaceuticals, they are a godsend, because I had a girlfriend, and I'm sure you've run into this in your practice, last year. She's so upbeat. She's all about her joy. When she walks in, she brings her joy with her. She says things, hello, beautiful. She's from Brooklyn. She's one of those personalities. And she went into an unexplainable depression, that she lost so much weight, she looked like a little old lady, and she didn't want to eat anymore. She always had a big appetite with gusto, and she wasn't happy anymore, and speaking in very suicidal terms. And it turned out that it was low thyroid. And I don't think people realize all that the thyroid controls. Is it my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I look at the hypothalamus up in the brain as the CEO, and he talks to the pituitary, and the pituitary now goes down to the thyroid and says, go do your thing. Is the thyroid the orchestra leader?
Well,
these are my lay terms. Sorry to put it in these.
You hit the nail right on the head. I mean, it all starts in the hypothalamus, it then goes to the pituitary, and then it goes to the thyroid. But we're living in an environment now that's so stripped of, the micronutrients that we need. I mean, iodine deficiency is rampant, across the world. Even, especially in Western hemispheres, don't use salt, and all salt was iodinized. So most people don't have enough selenium. And those are the two fundamental building blocks. If you don't have enough iodine, if you don't have enough selenium, you can't make T4 that gets converted to, T3 at the cellular level. So you're fighting a losing battle, even though your hypothalamus is now screaming at the CFO, the pituitary, to tell that damn thyroid to get to work. It doesn't happen if you don't have the right, micronutrients there for it.
And I see that you deal with gut issues and digestive disorders, and we're under the greatest environmental assault in the history of humanity. And you hardly run into a person who doesn't have some gut issues. When I lecture, I always say, how many in the room today are bloated? And everybody laughs, and then most of the hands go up. And I don't ask them about constipation, because nobody's going to put their hand up. But I know if they're bloated, they're constipated also. And that cascade, which I wrote about in my book, Toxic, how it ends up in the brain also. Making the brain toxic so that the brain actually shrinks. And so now you're messaging. So it's a multifactorial fix, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And there's a food allergy study that we do on everyone. We don't usually do it when they're first coming to see us because we know they're, endocrine challenged and there's a lot of things we're going to have to fix first. But when we do the study, I can't tell you, probably 90% of the time, or 90% of the foods that we see in the red box, which means you should never ever eat those foods again, or the things that are in the orange box, which are foods that you should eliminate for at least 90 days and then reintroduce one at a time. 90% of those foods that are in the red box or the orange box are foods that people have been eating their whole life. They love them. It's some of their favorite foods. And they don't realize that, it's really easy to figure out if it's IgA-mediated food allergies. Like me, it's with yellow cheeses. I eat them. I love the taste. 30 minutes later, look out, here it comes. Oh, I guess I can't eat yellow cheeses. So
sorry.
Yeah. But the most common way for it to happen is an IgG-mediated thing, meaning it's a cellular response, which usually doesn't happen until 2 or 3 days after you eat the food. And none of us can figure out that, oh, I feel terrible right now. I'm sluggish and have no energy, or I've got brain fog because something I ate 2 days ago or 3 days ago. We just can't put that together. So I think it's a study that should be done on every teenager. I think it should be done again at midlife, and it should probably be done as sort of your welcome to Medicare. Do it again and just sort of see where you are so that you can avoid these things that are just basically tearing up your gut. So that's one of our most important things. You don't leave my office on the first visit without a combination prebiotic and probiotic, which we start on everybody. And then within that first 3-month follow-up, we'll address the food allergies and then supporting the gut, because it is important. What is in the gut is what's in your brain. And neurotransmitters are made in your gut. They go to your brain. So, and all the inflammation that's forming in your gut is inflammation that's happening in your brain. And, the earliest symptom of Alzheimer's disease is a leaky blood-brain barrier, just like people have leaky gut. So if you don't address that issue, you're just begging for terrible problems down the road.
Man, you know your stuff. As I listen to you, and I know you're correct because I've done so much research. When I first was looking into this, I wish so much I could have found a doctor like you. There was nobody 20 years ago. There really wasn't.
I wish you would have found me however many years ago that was.
It's the people who will have access to you. All of you who are watching this interview, listen to what this man is saying. He's absolutely right. He understands the gut-brain connection. He understands the blood barrier connection. He understands how the pathway. He understands why your thyroid is acting out or not acting correctly. He understands. And what a great advantage, what an incredible advantage to long-term quality of life to find a doctor like Dr. Grubbs. This is the fastest half hour I've ever spent with anybody. I really could talk to you all day. And I know that you've written, 2 books?
Yes.
And could you give me the name of your books so that the audience can hear?
Well, most of mine are book chapters and articles. I'm in the process of authoring 2 books right now and working with an editor she's great. But every time I think I'm done, she tells me, you're really close to being done. Fix this, and fix that, because I always try to add a little bit more. But one of the things that I'm going to publish first is about the peak sexual performance. So that's the one that will probably come out first, just to, educate people that first you have to find out, is it an organic problem? Because you can throw the pharmacopoeia at something and it's going to work to a certain degree, and then it's going to stop working because if there's not enough blood flow to the area that you want to be stimulated, it's just not going to work in the long term. So, it's just going to address that, and all of these minimally invasive non-surgical procedures that we can now do that, as you say, are very, cutting edge technologies, and are so easy to do and have such, tremendous results. It's just extremely gratifying.
And I'm pretty good at titles. I think you call your book Peak Sexual Performance. It's a bestseller.
Okay.
Because it's upbeat. It offers hope. It gives a promise, and it's not a negative title. I think you should think about that. Unless you probably
maybe you can write my forward for me.
Let's. I'd love to see it. I really would.
Okay.
I'm very, very impressed by you. I thank you for your time today. I thank you for being a part of the Forever Health Network. I hope that everybody watches this interview between the two of us can feel his knowledge. He gets it. I know. I've interviewed hundreds of doctors. He feels it and gets it. I so appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Have a
Bye.
good day.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.